Great, thank you so much. So we're going to move on to the Southeast Asian nation panel, which will be moderated by the Luisa Tan Molina.
Good afternoon. I'm Luisa Molina, and I'm an atmospheric chemist. And my research area have focused on the science and policy of air pollution, especially the impacts of megacities on air quality and climate, as well as the sources and impacts of short-lived climate pollutants, especially black carbon and methane. So I'm going to introduce the three speakers this afternoon. They are from the Southeast Asia nations. And actually, we already heard this morning also Singapore is also one of the members of the the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So let me, the first speaker will be Dr. Linda Yanti Sulistiawati. Is that correct? I'm sorry. Okay, so she is a senior research fellow at Asian Pacific Center for Environmental Law at the National University of Singapore, and also an associate professor of law at Universitas Gajah Mada. She is internationally recognized scholar in Indonesian international environmental law, and her research has established her as a leading expert who is frequently consulted by the Indonesian government and international organizations. So she's going to talk about Indonesia policy on climate change. And so let me also introduce the next one would be Dr. Melissa Cruz, and she's the officer in charge of the Air Quality Dynamics Laboratory of the Manila Observatory. Her research has been focused on aerosol monitoring and chemical speciation, source apportionment via emissions inventory and receptor modeling and dispersion modeling. She's currently involved in research initiative that use low-cost sensor to evaluate the exposure and the health effects of PM 2.5. And she would talk about air quality studies in Metro Manila. And finally, the last speaker would be Dang Espita Casanova. She oversees the program development and strategic planning for Clean Air Asia's impact initiative on transport, energy, and urban air quality. Dang leads a team of specialists and researchers in the development of Clean Air Asia's key knowledge products, tools, and capacity building activities. She would talk about transforming evidence into clean air solutions in Southeast Asia. Okay, so, all right. So you would be the first one?
Yes.
That's right. Okay, so Linda?
Thank
please.
you. Thank you, Luisa. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just gonna stay away from the podium because you can only see my face. I have height deficiency, if you haven't noticed. So yeah, it's been really interesting to learn about a lot of science and a lot of surveys, etc. as a background from whatever it is that we have been discussing in the international negotiations, specifically in COPs and other international negotiations that we have been through. I was the Indonesian delegates for Paris Agreement in 2015, one of the negotiators, and yet I was like, I knew like 10% maybe. I retained the information from what we have discussed, specifically on the science stuff, maybe just 10%. I'm very sorry, my brain is not working for science, but but this is the key takeaways that we got from COP27 that was recently wrapped up. And some of the experts are saying that this COP was just a filler from the rest of the COP. We're going to have like a bigger COP next year in terms of global stocktake, in terms of enhanced NDC, and other things that we are going to discuss next year. So this year, what you see is that a lot of lukewarm things and reiteration from what we already have in COP26. So yeah, disappointing. So, and then we also have a grave concern. Why do we have a grave concern in COP27? Is that because most of the countries didn't submit enhanced NDC, only 25 of us did, and yeah, and it wouldn't reach the 1.5 that the Paris Agreement was aiming for. And also the language on fossil fuels phase down didn't even get a strong push in this COP. However, we did succeed in reinforcing or agreeing on the LND, Loss and Damage Fund. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's like an insurance policy for specifically vulnerable countries that against the climate change impacts. So anyway, if they were my students, I would give them, maybe C-, because we have been discussing this since COP21, and it took us so long to get to this. And this is just an empty bucket. There's nothing in it. They just agree, okay, we do the fund. Yes. What's in it? Nobody knows. Let's discuss it in the next COP. So yeah, okay. Too many criticism from me. But anyway, this is, I gathered the figures and data, not by myself, obviously. This is from the ASEAN Climate Change Report 2022. So we can see as a region, this is where we are. Right, and as countries, this is where we are. Indonesia is heightened in terms of CO2 emissions from fuel combustion, and this is from LULUCF, land use change and forestry. And sadly, this is where we are in renewables. You can see Vietnam is doing really well, Philippines doing okay, Indonesia, my country, is here, very sad. And this is China, Japan, Korea. And ASEAN is still very, very low in terms of aggregate renewable electricity capacity of the ASEAN member countries. So, however, there are a lot of ASEAN regional efforts, as you can see here. It's on the ASEAN website, so I'm just going to skip it. We don't have time for that. How about Indonesia? Indonesia recently hosted the G20 in Bali. And I think the language that they use was stronger in terms for the 1.2 to 1.5 degrees Celsius that the leaders of G20 was agreeing to pursue the efforts to limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So when we compare this to COP27, I think in terms of language, this was stronger. And then there's also this, the US, Japan, and other partners like Norway, etc., said that they would mobilize $20 billion of public and private finance to help Indonesia shut coal power plants and bring forward the sector's peak emission date by 7 years to 2030. So is $20 billion a lot of money? For me, yes, but for coal industry, is it a lot of money? No, why not? Right. Right. And just for waking you up from your sleep, how much do you think, how much money does Indonesia get in 6 months of trading coal? More or less than $20 billion? Yes? More. How much more? 100,000 more? 100 billion more? Well, that's a little too much more, but it's more. But you're right, it's more. So we are the second biggest coal exporter in the world, second only to Australia. And this is what we get, 38 billion in 6 months. So in 1 year, it'd be around, I don't know, 70, 80 billion US dollars in 1 year. So when they're saying, I give you $20 billion to shut your coal power plants, right? It's sorry, not gonna happen, I don't think. So this is the dilemma that we are facing as developing countries. I'm not sure if developed countries going through this, but if the finance that are offered to developing countries are less than what we get otherwise, I think we all know where we're going. The United Nations Secretary General recently, when he opened the COP27, he was saying that we are driving towards the climate hell with 1 foot on the accelerator, right? And nobody knows how to stop that. Actually, everybody knows, but nobody wants to do it. Like giving enough financial assistance to developing countries so for them to be able to survive, not using, these fossil fuel related activity, right? Okay, so Indonesia plans to bring forward the peaking in coal to 2030, and I think they took the money, and then because it was going to peak in 2056 anyway, so they took the money and then and use it, I think more for transitions, for awareness and things like that, not for replacing, directly replacing coal with something else. But they're still using, they're planning to use CCS. And if we transfer to cleaner energy sources, Indonesia's emission will reduce by 38%. So that's a big chunk. Yeah, when you see the graph, the yellow ones are coal, and you see how much we make, or we consumption of coals for the country is higher and higher from 1990 to 2020. Second problem, deforestation. Not a strange problem for ASEAN, our ASEAN neighborhood, because every time there is like haze, every time there's problem in terms of forests and forest fires, and then there will be research to follow the money. Who finance these companies who are looking at this forest related clearing? It would be not just Indonesia, but also our neighboring countries, right? I'm not going to name names, but I think you know who you are, right? Okay. So the government of Indonesia stated that the forest fire had fell by 82% in 2020, and they rehabilitated some areas, right? And they put moratorium on clearing primary forest, which contributed to a 45% drop in deforestation with moratorium areas in 2018 compared to 2002 to 2016. The moratorium of clearing primary forest is now permanent. What you see here is the type of clearing that we have. They say they can clear up to 3 football fields of forest within 1 minute. Yeah, so now hopefully it will be permanent for ever, because we will have a change of administration in 2024. Tackling deforestation will cut Indonesia's emission by 60%. So 60 plus 38 from coal, it's already 98%. Imagine if we can do that. Maybe, utopically, maybe. But this is from the regulatory body of oil and gas in Indonesia. They say the oil demand will increase 139% in 2050, and the gas demand will increase to 298% in 2050. So the fact that we need to move to renewables and ditch fossil fuels is still, it's still very questionable when the demand is very, very high. But these are the plans that they highlighted that we will do, like in country, in terms of renewables. They will phase down fossil fuel. They put in carbon tax and carbon trading, co-firing coal plants with renewable energy, retirement of coal plants, CCS and CCUS technology will be adopted. And then Indonesia has nickel and potentially a crucial component to the batteries used in electric vehicles. We also have cobalt and other things. The economists suggest that by 2030, Indonesia will probably be the 4th largest producer of green commodities in the world, behind only Australia, Chile, and Mongolia. So this is the guy, the president of Indonesia currently. And this is our NDC. So the NDC has been enhanced. We're one of the 25 countries that put in our NDC for COP27, from 29% to 31.89, with international support from 41% to 43.2. And the net zero is also pushed back 2050. But we also highlight that the nationally determined contribution in terms of Paris Agreement, they say that it's a bottom-up process, but in Indonesia, once it's come to the country level and then going down to the local level, it became a top-down process, because nobody knew how these numbers came up. Only the central government people knows, but the local governments, the ones that are supposed to implement this, they have to scramble and find out how they can do or reach these targets. It is important to ascertain that new targets are applicable in the local level. So in terms of reportings, they're all online, I suppose, the enhanced NDC and the LTS LCCR. And then there's also like other types of regulatory documents and instruments that are listed online. Whoops, sorry. And we come to my last slide, and there's no action in terms of COP27, and then there's too much unwitting from developed countries or trying to delay whatever it is that we ask them initially. And then I think as a region in ASEAN, we need to work together, not just pushing for our own NDCs, because that's not going to work. We need to work together as a region, and Indonesia, being a large part of ASEAN, is one of the most responsible party in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. So Melissa. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. Before I do my presentation, I'd like to tell you more about the Manila Observatory, or MO. So MO was founded in 1865 and was the National Weather Bureau, and eventually also the Seismology Bureau during the Spanish and American colonial times in the Philippines. After World War II, when the Philippine government established a separate weather forecasting agency, MO started work on solar and seismologic studies. By mid-1980s, MO began its shift into environmental, climate, and air quality science. And at present, we have 8 laboratories which do work on air quality, upper atmosphere, data and sensor development, geomatics, solid earth dynamics, climate, and resilience. So on behalf of the Air Quality Dynamics Lab, I'll be presenting some of our studies in Metro Manila. So the picture in the center is our ionosphere studies building. So we put our air quality sensors on the rooftop. We started monitoring PM 2.5 concentrations in the late 1990s using a dichotomous sampler and minivols. So these are box plots of annual PM 2.5 concentrations from 2000 to 2021. Our levels have consistently exceeded the WHO guideline values, but we see a decreasing trend, which we attribute to policy interventions. For instance, the dip in 2011 could be due to the stricter emission standards for in-use, rebuilt and imported used vehicles. The dip that started in 2016 could be due to our shift to Euro 4 emission standards. So as part of one of our studies on dispersion modeling, we were able to monitor PM 2.5 levels and composition in different sites in Metro Manila, as shown on the map. So our results show that first, PM 2.5 concentrations were very much higher in a traffic site along EDSA. So EDSA is the main thoroughfare in Metro Manila. Second, levels in the contrary to our expectations that wet scavenging could lower the aerosol concentrations. PM 2.5 levels in the dry and the wet season are comparable, and even higher, a little bit higher in the wet season. Thirdly, black carbon concentrations comprise a large percentage of the PM 2.5 in all the sites, ranging from around 25% in a mixed site like MO up to around 50% in traffic sites like EDSA. So we actually first saw this finding in an earlier project called the Asian Regional Research Program on Environmental Technology, or ARPET, which was a regional collaborative study between 6 countries in Asia. On the left figure are seasonal PM 2.5 concentrations from 2001 to 2008 at the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok. And on the left panel on the bottom is for MO in the Philippines. So we can see that trends are opposite between the 2 countries. On the right, we can also see that among the 6 countries in Asia, Manila had the highest BC concentration, as well as the highest % contribution of black carbon to PM 2.5. In 2018, in preparation for the 2019 NASA-funded campaign called the Cloud Aerosol and Monsoon Processes Philippines Experiment. That's a mouthful. CAMPEX, we had the CAMPEX Weather and Composition Monitoring, or the checksum project. So using microorifice uniform deposition impactors, we were able to collect size-resolved particulate matter, mass and composition. The bulk mass concentration was almost 50 microgram per cubic meter. 33% water-soluble species comprised the 33%, and BC comprised 27% of the PM mass. This graph also shows that PM mass and BC mass is within the 0.1, or at least the bulk of the PM and the BC mass is between 0.1 to 1 microns. We note that these peaks are in the greenfield gap, where wet scavenging by rain is relatively inefficient. So we think that this could partly explain our earlier findings of and varying concentrations during the wet and the dry season. In 2015, we had a campaign called the Metro Manila Aerosol Characterization Experiment, which was a collaboration between the Leibniz Institute for Tropospheric Research and several institutions in Metro Manila or in the Philippines. Using aethalometers, we measured BC concentrations inside the university campus, in a residential area, along Katipunan Avenue, which is a very busy road, and in a major intersection where jeepney terminal is also located. The jeepney, if you're not familiar with it, is a very popular mode of public transport in the Philippines. Results show that maximum BC concentrations were found in the terminal, and BC concentrations could reach as high as 76 microgram per cubic meter. And that's just the BC. This study also confirmed our earlier findings that BC could comprise as much as 50 to 75% of our PM 2.5 mass. Actually, one more thing, we found that BC levels decrease with distance from the road, as you can see from the plot. An emissions inventory and dispersion modeling study with Clean Air Asia and another NGO. From the plot, from the map on the center, we can see that mobile sources contribute the largest PM 2.5 to the largest have the largest contribution to ambient PM 2.5 in Metro Manila. I haven't been able to include the slide on source apportionment through receptor modeling, but our results also point to traffic, industrial activities, secondary aerosols, or aged aerosols, biomass burning, and sea salt as the main sources of PM 2.5. Recently, we also investigated how meteorological factors such as wind circulations and the PBL height affect the PM 2.5 concentrations in Metro Manila. This was part of CAMPEX, and we used data from a high spectral resolution LiDAR from the University of Wisconsin, a beta attenuation monitor from the government, weather station, and WRF-Chem modeling. And we found out that horizontal directional wind shear between synoptic and mesoscale winds promote stagnant conditions that lead to high aerosol concentrations. Synoptic winds that affect Metro Manila are, of course, the southwest monsoon and the northeast monsoon, while mesoscale winds include the sea land breeze because of Manila Bay. We have the mountain breeze from the Sierra Madre, which is found on the eastern side of Metro Manila. We have the lake breeze from Laguna Lake, which is located southeast of Metro Manila, and a valley breeze from the Central Luzon Plains, just north of Metro Manila. We also found out from this study that this horizontal wind directional shear actually plays a greater role in modulating PM 2.5 concentrations than the diurnal variations in PBL height. A 2-week research cruise in northern Palawan, or near the Sulu Sea, in 2011 and 2012 also observed aerosol characteristics and meteorological characteristics and their relationships. This was a joint mission by MO and the Naval Research Lab as part of the 7 Southeast Asian Studies, or the 7 Seas program. This study described aerosol events, high aerosol events that were linked to smoke from Borneo. And this study also reported that high aerosol events are affected by, or aerosol events are affected by meteorological factors such as the Madden-Julian oscillation, cold pool events, and the development of tropical cyclones. Similarly, case studies during the checksum campaign in 2018 also identified the long-range transport of biomass burning aerosols during the southwest monsoon, which is most likely from the maritime continent. So this was seen in measurements and modeling results using the NAPS model. So in addition, as shown in the top figures, emissions from continental East Asia also affected the aerosol characteristics in Metro Manila during this campaign. So one of our main research interests now is to assess the exposure to PM pollution, particularly of those that are regularly exposed to severe levels of PM 2.5, like the jeepney drivers. In this particular project, our study area was the jeepney route between 2 universities in Metro Manila. So we used low-cost sensors for this study. PM 2.5 hotspots were identified in front of the universities, in front of a shopping mall, and in a transport terminal where people tend to gather and spend some time in. So our numbers say that jeepney drivers are exposed to concentrations that could reach as high as 90 microgram per cubic meters. And we estimated that they could inhale as much as 100 microgram of PM 2.5 in a 10-hour workday. So other instruments currently being maintained in MO include an Aeronet sun photometer, a nephelometer from the Spartan network, and a low-cost portable sensor that we use in the jeepney study. This was developed in Academia Sinica in Taiwan. So overall, there has been much progress in determining the concentrations, the chemical components, and the sources of particulate matter in Metro Manila. We also have a greater understanding of its dispersion, the effect of meteorology, and long-range transport. Collaborations with several institutions, both in the Philippines and abroad, has certainly made this possible. And however, a sustained long-term continuous aerosol monitoring and speciation remains a challenge. We also hope to expand our measurement to other criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases. We also need higher temporal resolution measurements, as well as wider spatial coverage, since most of our studies have been concentrated in Metro Manila. We also have not fully utilized the available satellite measurements, and of course, human resource and capacity building would help us advance our research. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Dan Casanova, Program Manager of Cleaner Asia in our Manila headquarters. And I'd like to thank, of course, the organizers for having us here today. So after all the science, I'd like to delve deeper into how this evidence are being transformed at the government work, particularly in cities in Southeast Asia. So I'd like to firstly introduce our organization. So Cleaner Asia is a 20-plus-year-old organization founded by the ADB, World Bank, and USAID. We have our headquarters in Manila, Philippines, but also we have offices in New Delhi in India and also in Beijing in China. So our mission, of course, is to help governments across the region to realize their commitments to improve air quality and, of course, mitigate climate change. And we ground our work on 3 pillars, namely informing for action, wherein we co-produce or co-develop knowledge products with governments and other institutions to rally efforts and to inform programs on reducing emissions at the national and local level. We also do training and capacity building work, particularly on specific areas of air quality management, such as air quality monitoring, emission inventory, health impacts mapping, strengthening air quality communication, and also devising and formulating clean air action plans. And we provide policy guidance and support to different policymakers and decision makers in crafting standards, policies, and also legislation. So we work with particularly governments, at the national and subnational levels, also private sector and other civil society organizations to operationalize our work. And we also have specific impact initiatives on sustainable urban transport and clean energy and clean air, where we, of course, tackle stationary sources and coal-fired power plants. My presentation for today would focus on our work with cities. And for the past 8 years of my stay at Cleaner Asia, we have formulated and rather strengthened our work in building the capacity of cities across the region in formulating clean air action plans. And I've just summarized here an overview of the different components of strategic air quality management, which we have supported governments in. So in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam, we focused our work on air quality monitoring as well as emission inventory development. Also in China, where we know, of course, that cleaner action plans and capacity building is very crucial in operationalizing their top-down legislation and, of course, strengthening this capacity at the local level. In India, we have also spearheaded air quality management capacity assessment in at least 30 cities, where we have identified specific capacity building areas where, of course, not only Cleaner Asia, but other organizations can provide support on. And in Mongolia, we have facilitated or supported the development of the country's national action program on reducing air pollution and built or developed a national emissions inventory in 2017. So our work is basically grounded on the guidance framework for better air quality in Asian cities, which we have co-developed with the UN Environment Program in 2014. So this framework emphasizes on the need for strengthened and robust knowledge base to help, of course, the governments in identifying the levels of pollution, where are the sources or what are the sources, and of course, what are the impacts. And we promote or we encourage governments to put the evidence base or the knowledge base into solutions, or to use this to create solutions at the national, local, and individual and community level. And this would then be institutionalized through clean air action plans. So in our work with cities in particular, we encourage or we espouse the implementation of cost-effective strategies to reduce emissions. Of course, recognizing that resources are not infinite, and that every government, specifically local governments, would have specific context in terms of human capacity, technical capacity, and all the, of course, the conditions that we have discussed here today. So what we do is to help them through the process of scoping what their specific needs are in terms of cleaner action planning, and then providing them support and putting together the evidence base, and help prioritize, of course, policy and technology actions that they need to take on. I think in the process, we emphasized that this should be a multi-sector participatory process, and letting, of course, the government lead the process, and with support from sectors such as the academia, private sector, and also civil society. So we have been part of, and we are very glad to have witnessed how cities in Southeast Asia have spearheaded transformative policies and programs on emission reduction. And I'm just going to present some city work here today as use cases or case studies for all to appreciate where collaboration can also start in terms of providing technical assistance to monitoring, and also, of course, improving in the implementation of policies and programs in the region. So one city that I'd like to focus on is Quezon City. So Quezon City is part of Metro Manila, and their commitments through different international platforms have driven their pioneering work in terms of spearheading air quality management strategies in the country. So what they did was to partner with another platform, C40 Cities, to establish their own air quality monitoring, a hybrid one. So it's a mix of reference and non-reference sensors at the height of the pandemic. So this started in 2020 to 2021, and have developed an air quality monitor, which they pledged to expand and continue to support and manage in the coming years. So the baseline air quality information that they have gathered through that monitoring network was used and will be used as basis for their Clean Air Action Plan, which Cleaner Asia is helping them to develop in the next year. So the city of 3 million residents now have around 20 plus sensors, non-reference sensors, coupled with collocation and calibration studies with reference instruments funded by the government. And these are deployed in areas within the city which have the most vulnerable segments of population, including roadsides and tenements or settlements where previous landfill was located. And we're also spearheading a study on indoor air quality monitoring in a hospital setting, where we're looking at the dynamics or exchange of indoor and outdoor air quality to help the hospital administration design their air quality programs as well. So in the next year, the city is set to complete its emission inventory, a health impacts assessment, and also information and education campaigns to rally support from the private sector, the academe, and civil society in the development of their Clean Air Action Plan. So another city that I'd like to present is Bogor City in Indonesia. I think Bogor is one of the first cities in Indonesia which have completed its Clean Air Action Plan. And this is a testament that uh, the effort in developing a cleaner action plan really also lies on leadership of the city, wherein they have made efforts to consolidate existing data and collect additional data as needed. Of course, guided by experts, they were able to put together key data and information on pollutants of concern within the city. They were able to map key health outcomes that they need to act on, and of course, collaborate with the health sector in terms of reducing the risk. And of course, put together an emission inventory initially from top-down sources, but was augmented by some surveys to put together the database that was needed for cleaner action planning. So in 2018, they were able to identify targeted measures for several sectors, and these include, of course, emission reduction for mobile sources, area sources, including banning of and monitoring of straw burning and waste burning, point or stationary sources, which included, of course, reporting mechanisms for private sector to the Dalahaka or the Environment Office website, and of course, in increasing or strengthening the capacity for air quality management and also community mobilization. So the next city that I'd like to share is the capital city of the Philippines, so Manila City. And this work, I think, is quite unique because it started also with very strong leadership from the previous mayor, Isko Moreno, where he headed the formation of a clean air task force within the city to really push forward policies and programs for emission reduction and the development of its clean air action plan. So we worked with different agencies within the city. And I think the narrative or the messaging around the development of the Cleaner Action Plan was further strengthened when we were able to map health incidences attributable to air pollution even before the pandemic. And this was further strengthened when we were able to quantify. So I'll skip this and move to here. We were able to quantify the benefits of improving air quality in the city. So benefits in terms of course, reduced mortality, but also reduced health costs due to hospitalization, due to the different mortality cases caused by COPD, cerebrovascular diseases, ischemic heart disease, cardiovascular, lung cancer, and also respiratory illnesses. So we did some further modeling, and we saw that if we are to implement a suite of emission reduction measures, we will be able to significantly reduce emissions in the city by 2030. And also reduce population-weighted PM 2.5 as well. So the study just showed that, of course, there would be a significant number of avoided premature deaths if this suite of measures are implemented. And of course, the total savings would be up to $6 billion if implemented by 2030. So the case of Can Tho in Vietnam, I think the element or the component that I'd like to highlight here is that through a participatory cleaner action planning process, we were able to rally support from the government itself in strengthening investments in air quality monitoring equipment, and also, of course, strengthening their capacity to lead awareness-raising workshops to include communities. So these are the most vulnerable segments of their population, and I think through different, a couple of projects, they were able to engage more funding and more support from external supporters for their cleaner action plan development. And this is the last case, also in Metro Manila. And it was good that Dr. Liz already set the scene in providing you information on the key pollutant sources in the Metro Manila National Capital Region, because this figure just shows at the hyperlocal setting how we see transport and also industry sources affect hotspots within a city. So this is Marikina City in Metro Manila, and we have been able to illustrate that specific hotspots like this one here and this one here affect school children, commuters, and also residential areas. And up to when we published this data, or we handed over this result to the city government, they were not aware that such hotspots existed in their jurisdiction. And this actually spearheaded some very drastic actions at the city level to control emissions. So I just like to wrap up, of course, that city work remain to present opportunities for collaboration, and not only, of course, from academics and experts from such as those who are in the room, but also private sector, civil society. And I think a next step further is to strengthen regional collaboration. And from Cleaner Asia's end, I'd like to share that we organize a biennial event called Better Air Quality Conference. So one is coming up in 2023, and we will be announcing details soon. So we hope that everyone in this room will be able to convene in that event, in that regional event, and share stories and opportunities to work together. So thank you very much, and have a nice evening.
Working, yeah. Okay. Okay, well, first of all, I wanted to thank our three speakers for their very interesting and excellent presentation, from climate policy in Indonesia to the air quality in Metro Manila. And then from Cleaner Asia, we heard about the action plans and how to improve and reduce the emissions. So, I would like to invite now the audience, the participants, to please ask questions or comments to our three panelists. Okay. Also, do we have? I think there might be some question also from the online. Are there any, please?
Yes, a question for you. Yeah, so you mentioned about this network for the cities. So this network that you are sort of putting out, is it the reference grid monitor, low cost sensors? And
The monitoring network.
monitoring network, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a mix actually of low cost, medium cost sensors that we couple with the government established reference instruments.
And what is the rationale of setting up this monitoring network? Are you only going for the hotspots, or you also have some background kind of measurement, if possible?
Yeah, it's actually context specific. So for example, for Quezon City, since they wanted to establish their baseline information or data, so we set up air quality sensors in strategic locations around the city. For the Marikina case, it was actually more of mapping hotspots within the city. So it's really government driven. They reach out to us, and like offer, for example, what their objectives are in getting information or getting data on air quality. And then
And-
we provide them the.
And do you maintain that network for a long time, or just based on, the government again?
Yeah, it also depends on the city needs. So for air quality the air quality work in Quezon City, it would be permanent.
Okay.
But for other cities, it depends on like the objective. So for Marikina, it was more of a hotspot determination, and then sustainability of the monitoring
Okay.
network will be up to the city as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
As the holder of the microphone, I will take this opportunity to ask a question for you here. I'm particularly interested in, Linda, your presentation as the Indonesia representative to COP26 or COP27. ASEAN has a certain role as being highly impacted by climate change. How do you see a path forward for ASEAN to exert a bigger influence on the global scale if you see there is a path for the region to be more involved?
Should I just, okay, thank you for the question. I think ASEAN as a region is very impacted in terms of climate change because most of us are surrounded by oceans. And with the higher temperature, it would means that we are impacted by food security problem and also territorial problem because some of the islands will be inundated. We like in terms of international negotiation, ASEAN in every COP have their own sort of, not a block, but really like a regional thing. And the negotiators would discuss between us in terms of regional, because 10 countries is a lot stronger than just one. And usually ASEAN negotiators would try to push forward an issue together because like, for example, Indonesia sent 45 negotiators to COP21. The US sent like 125 and Laos sent 2. So you know what I mean? So even in the number of negotiators, we've, unless we stick together, ASEAN countries are fighting for themselves. But if like 10 countries fight together, not fight, like negotiate together, I think we have a better chance. So yeah, so the path is keep having our regional targets and also regional communication. And even though like outside ASEAN might think like, these people in ASEAN keep on having meetings and nothing gets done, but that's not true actually. By the fact that we have consensus of the 10 countries itself for 30 years plus, it's already a result. And keep in mind how many countries in ASEAN that are democratic, not too many. So having that in mind, and the fact that we could sit together and talk about issues, as important as climate change is a plus, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the interesting talks. And yeah, I have the second question to the second speaker and about the Manila observations about the black carbon. So I was a bit surprised that a pretty high fraction of the black carbon in the PM 2.5. And I'd like to make sure that what would be the organic fractions, and that was in the unidentified fraction in your presentation. And if it's so, maybe the likely source of the black carbon would be from some uncontrolled diesel vehicles, or yeah, something like that? Or yeah, do you have any comments or information about this?
Thank you for your question. Yes, the black carbon source, based on our results, could be not just the jeepneys, but diesel vehicles in general. Although one of our studies that made use of inverse modeling attributed 94% of the BC, well, in a specific site that's very near the road. 94% of the BC was from jeepneys, but we still think that other types of vehicles also contribute to the BC concentration. As for the unaccounted mass, yes, I forgot to mention earlier, we think that these are organic aerosols that we weren't able to measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Right. So this is like not like question, like a comment to the last speaker. And I work in a greenhouse gas, and usually we say going to the city council, hey, let's do a greenhouse gas monitoring. They say no resources, but actually that seems to be not true. Then actually governments have, if they're motivated to do something, they can do even inventory, maybe some monitoring. That's great. Then also I pretty much see, because for example, think about the energy, the CO2 or the greenhouse gas coming from energy production, pretty much what you're doing can be applicable to those calculations. So I think based on your remarks, I feel more positive than the have a hope. So I'm really looking forward to discuss more about the kind of future, how you can actually not just clean Asia, actually the greenhouse gas pollutants, we recognize the pollutant now. So maybe in the future, you can expand your horizon to more like not just air pollutant, but greenhouse gas emission. I think that's a great talk. Thank you.
Maybe just a quick response to that. I think the appetite from the local governments or cities is growing in terms of receiving updated real-time data that they could use for policy making and programmatic decisions. And yeah, definitely from the beginning of the day, I've been already seeing opportunities to collaborate and to merge monitoring efforts, for example, for CO2, air quality, temperature, maybe even traffic data. And I think, yeah, Southeast Asian cities would be a very good use case for these scenarios.
Thank you for your comments. I have actually a question. I take advantage of being the facilitator. You mentioned at least about the black carbon from jeepney, okay, and that they're exposed. I read somewhere, I mean, of course, I grew up in Manila. I used to use the jeepney, and it is one of the transportation everybody use. You have in and out. And then I read just recently that they actually are using and converting it to electric jeepney. And of course, the driver were not very happy because jeepney is supposed to be a cultural thing. You know, you're paying, each of them is unique because you're paying them and all of that. But what happened to that electrification of the jeepney? Is that really been done, or just a lot of talk, but nothing has been done?
There's actually the jeepney modernization program. Yeah, and it's since like you mentioned, it's a very complicated issue. It's not just a matter of transitioning to electric. There's the economic, social, cultural aspect of the problem. Yes. So it's, I think, meeting a lot of objections. Since number one, I think the jeepney drivers cannot afford the transition. Yeah, I think that's one of the major issues about the shift.
That's
Yes.
probably one of the most important things that they could do in Manila is to take care of that, you know. But anyway, it's similar problems, and I remember also in India, of course, you talk about the three-wheeler, and then they're also trying to electrify that, but it's complicated because you have not only just the cultural thing, but the financial, you know, it's mainly is the financial. It's not easy. It's always easy to say that you can buy electric car, but where the money comes from. Anyway, so any other questions, comments? Yes, Eric, please.
More than a question is a comment. I'm very glad to see studies on personal exposure, especially on public transport. As we can see, concentrations at the street level are several folds higher than ambient concentrations. And for the region, for Southeast Asia, this is very important. I guess the major intake, the daily major intake of pollutants comes from commuting, from our daily commuting trips.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you for your panel. I have a question. In the cities in your countries, well, Indonesia as well as in the Philippines, what would you say would be the single most important policy intervention to improve air quality?
I think a common denominator that we've witnessed is perhaps the enforcement of the Clean Air Act of the respective countries. And what at least we've seen in the Philippines is that, so since our Clean Air Act is 20 years old already and it has not been updated for that long, actually the push or the pressure is already coming from the local governments for the national government to get updating, to update the legislation. I think if that updating or follow through in terms of gathering the evidence to support that, and coupled with financial incentives from the part of the government to the national government to the local government, then that would be like a game changer in terms of implementing programs and actions for reduced emissions.
My answer is actually very specific: emissions reduction from the mobile sector. And well, that also includes stricter implementation of the Clean Air Act, since the emissions testing is under the Clean Air Act.
Yes, two actually, Jolene. Coal and deforestation.
Thank you very much.
I think we also have other participants from the ASEAN country. I wonder if they might like to make some comments. No, okay. So any other questions or comments? No. All right. Well, thank you very much, panelists, and for your presentations, your discussion, and also thank the audience, okay, for the participation. Thank you.
Hey, everybody.
All right, everyone. Once again, thank you so much for today's sessions, to the organizers and also the speakers and also the participants that you guys have been here. Thank you so much. What a day. So much information. I mean, speaking myself, I learned a lot today. Just a couple of observations, not just a few, but I hear about lots of observation, and I hear lots of still need for fundamental observation, not just advanced one. We still need to understand the basic understanding of the chemistry or something happening in a transport, everything. So that's really important. Also, we are hearing a lot, many times actually, the need of a coordination. It looks like we have having similar capability in different parts of the Asia for different reasons. I think it's a great opportunity to see how we can coordinate, then we maximize the resources we have right now. That's something we can discuss tomorrow. That'd be great. And yeah, obviously the last one is also great. We have so many great examples of actually working with the stakeholders. Also, for example, the last talk was, I really like that talk actually, about the city council people working with the science. Then also the Korea session was also highlighted sort of the tools from science, how it's almost close to how to inform those actions. So it's really about the workshop agenda. So tomorrow we will discuss more about sort of the issues and also the challenge raised today's discussion. So we're looking forward to discussing more. And it's just a little housekeeping stuff. So after this, so everyone, we have cocktail reception, a cocktail hour, also the dinner reception of this after a long day. So we're gonna enjoy the conversation after this. So bus is leaving 6:15. So just the wrap up your stuff, and I'll see you there. Also the people joining online, I'll see you guys tomorrow 9 a.m. Singapore time. So thank you for being with us today for a long day. So I'm looking forward to see you guys tomorrow. Then we continue our conversation. So with that, I'll close today's session and see you tomorrow.